Hello, and welcome to Beyond the Frame, the Art of Photography Artist Panel at LBMA Downtown in the Josephine Molina Gallery. My name is Paul Loya, and I am the Deputy Director of Exhibitions and Collections. Moderating today's talk with me is Curatorial Assistant Amanda Baker. Amanda earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Art History with a minor in Museum Studies from San Francisco State University. Prior to working at the Long Beach Museum of Art as a Curatorial Assistant, she interned at the De Young Museum in San Francisco and the Martin Wong Gallery at SF State. She's a Long Beach native, and some of her earliest memories of the museums are at the Ocean Boulevard campus. She's also a practicing photographer working primarily with analog materials and alternative processes. We have a phenomenal panel of artists joining us today. Each of these artists were selected to show in the LBMA Juried Photography Exhibition at LBMA Downtown, juried by Deanna Templeton and Robert von Sternberg. Starting on my right, we have Kovi Konowiecki. Kovi was born in Long Beach, California, and has spent much of the past 6 years between Los Angeles and Mexico City. He holds a BA in Media Communications and an MA in Photography from the University of the Arts, London. Kovi has exhibited his work in galleries and museums such as ROSEGALLERY, Santa Monica, California, These Days, Los Angeles, California, Salut Au Monde, Porto, Portugal, and the National Portrait Gallery in London in 2000. In 2018, Kovi co-founded a small publication, Mula Press, to explore his love for bookmaking and to publish personal projects and special artist editions. Kovi released his first monograph with Deadbeat Press in July of 2021. Next, we have Ailene deVries. Ailene is a Canadian-American artist currently working in Signal Hill. Using words, photos, and fibers, including botanical pressings, deVries explores daughterhood, correspondence, and grief. They hold a BFA from the Toronto Metropolitan University and an MA from the Art Institute of Chicago. deVries has exhibited in major cities, including Toronto, Chicago, Edinburgh, and now Long Beach. On her right is Reina Saloum. Reina is a Lebanese-American artist living in Long Beach, California. With a background in oil paint and graphic design, she embarked on a new medium within the world of art through film photography the past few years. Her love of photography has led her to explore abstraction and create colorful compilations through a lens. Next, we have Ray Bravo. Ray earned a BA in painting and drawing from California State University, Long Beach, and an MFA in drawing from Claremont Graduate University. Ray taught art at East LA College and Long Beach City College. Additionally, he worked and has since retired from NBC Universal as a computer graphics artist. Ray has shown in the Torrance Art Museum, Orange County Center for Contemporary Art, the Long Beach Museum of Art, where he has pieces in the permanent collection. Last but not least, we are joined by Stephen Childs. Stephen Childs is a Los Angeles-based artist and educator. He received his MFA from Claremont Graduate University. He has exhibited his artwork throughout Los Angeles and internationally, including at the Riverside Museum of Art, Los Angeles International Airport, in partnership with the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs, Kobe Design University, Kobe, Japan, Newton Gallery, also in Kobe, Japan, among others. He is a professor and exhibitions director at Azusa Pacific University, overseeing notable exhibitions by artists Tim Hawkinson, Judy Pfaff, Tim Bavington, David Flores, Lisa Adams, Monique Petro, and Sush Machida.
This exhibition, we were kind of just thinking about, we had this idea that photography as a medium can do something that other art forms can't, which is essentially balancing fact or objectivity, but also kind of somehow blending it with artists' own narratives, and it kind of creates this realm that we felt like other mediums don't. And then at the same time, we kind of realized, and we're noticing the photography is so democratized, I don't know what the right word is, but everyone's doing it, and then, which is great, but then we kind of thought, you know, how do we get to the nuance of it, and how is it defined, and why is it still important? Because it's so oversaturated now.
Jumping to the first question, we want to talk about essentially process, and which your process is in your work. And you each can answer individually. Feel free to conversate amongst each other if you have something you find relevant that you want to speak to. It's an open conversation, so please feel free to do that. First question we had was: is your process more of an impulsive approach, or is it preconceived and then executed?
I can jump in.
Yeah.
Well, so thanks for having us, Dylan. Thanks for like putting this. I don't know where you're, streaming this for people that can't be here. But yeah, this is kind of cool for me, particularly. I'm from Long Beach, as Paul read in my bio, and I grew up here and make a lot of my work here. So it's cool to. It's cool and also surreal to be sitting in this space that's like designated for showing and promoting art when I'm making a lot of my work on the streets that kind of intersect this space. That I would say is a little bit more gritty and kind of, so it's really cool, that kind of juxtaposition. So thanks guys for putting this together. So as a photographer, in terms of process, it's something I think a lot about. I think I work within the broad spectrum of creating a larger body of work and actually like a book in mind. Whether or not a book ever comes to fruition or I get the opportunity to do that, I'm always thinking about my work sort of in the context of making a book, if that makes sense. So when I'm out shooting, I'm thinking of a larger project, but also how can this be a book? How can this project one day turn into a book? But at the same time, I think it's very intuitive. So I sort of set those boundaries for myself to create a body of work, but allow kind of intuition and coming across. A lot of my work is portraiture based, so a lot of it's kind of just coming across people that I see, and very sort of in a crazy way chasing after them or trying to figure out a way to kind of connect with them and as humans and photograph them. So there is a big intuitive process in terms of selecting people on a very sort of second to second basis that I can't really preconceive. You never know what you're going to see and who you're going to meet. So yeah, I would say a little bit of both, kind of working within a scope of a project, but also allowing intuition to kind of take over and dictate, some of those decisions. And then, when you actually get the chance to take a portrait of someone, working within the constraints of, the light, location, and what's available to you. So I think a lot of it is very intuitive in that way.
Do you want to talk about the image that you have?
Sure. So yeah, I have an image, a portrait over there of my friend Rashad actually wearing a do-rag, and he's kind of facing a bush. And actually, that portrait was made in a more formal way. So that was Rashad is someone that was introduced to me growing up in Long Beach and working on a body of work a couple years ago. And I had this image of taking a portrait of a friend, kind of this juxtaposition of the dark with the light. So the do-rag obviously very much like pops out against this sort of dark surface. So that image was made in a much more formal kind of premeditative way, but at the same time, things kind of never turn out how you plan. So I had a different image in my head going into it, and then ended up falling in love with him sort of looking away from the camera. I think it just evoked a little bit more of like a emotion and kind of allowed the viewer to bring their own interpretation to the image, opposed to just like a more formal portrait of staring at the camera. So thanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really wanted to learn about your process a little bit, actually, because yours is very ambiguous.
Yeah. So for me, I started with photography about 5 or so years ago. I did a lot of agency photography. I was working with like models, like shooting them for portfolios. And so my process was, hey, here's a model, I gotta shoot them for portfolio work. Just very generic, kind of like working with them, kind of positioning them in a way. So it was, I guess, more so just kind of a little less technical, just throwing them into a place and we would just walk around, finding like different areas. So those weren't even really thought out. It was just me and then feeling it intuitively. And now where I've kind of taken my photography, it's kind of more so a space that I see and working within that space. Usually it's kind of more of an eclectic place. I went to a show. This is where I got my images over there by Paul. It's the red kind of is depicted in this kind of aggressive way. I shot a concert, like the crowd in the concert. So it wasn't so much the concert, it was more the crowd. And I placed this material over the lens. And I think that was by accident. It was like a tissue or something, and it came out very abstract. So I feel like in those situations, they're completely different. It couldn't be like the models where I've placed them and it was more me telling them, directing them. It was more this this kind of ethereal way of photography that came out just completely beautiful in its own right, because it was abstract and can't really tell what it is, but it's more on that playing field. Yeah. How about you? What is your process?
My process, I work kind of with prompts, I think. I think a lot of my work is very intuitive, but also prompted in very strange ways. The image that I've included is the one over here, which is an image from an old art history textbook. There was this book, my mom was my art teacher, and I grabbed this large the Louvre textbook off of her bookshelf in high school, and I was gifted this giant bouquet of peonies, and I wanted to keep them. So I think that what a lot of us do is we press flowers in large textbooks when we want to keep them, and that's what I did for this process. But then I went back to the flowers a few months later, and they had molded through the pages of the textbook. So I kind of took that as a prompt towards a new way to look at art history and a new way to look at the textbook, which has been like a way, in a very standard way, we've been telling art history for many, many years. And so I started to make these images page by page in this textbook that was more about like the silence of certain voices throughout history and the absence of like female bodies or like non-binary bodies within the art history, because they are there, but they're not represented very often. So that was my process for this series, and I'm still being prompted mostly by botanicals throughout my life. So yeah, that was the series.
Well, mine is the angel with the gardener. It's Los Ángeles y el Jardinero, which means the angels and the gardener, and it's actually one of a series of 4. And the way that started, photographer friends asked me to be in a show, and I don't think of myself as really a photographer. I'm more of a painter drawer, but to me that's more like a painting or a photo collage, because it's mainly done in Photoshop. And the show was the theme was Los Angeles, which shot in and around Los Angeles. But I took the word Los Angeles, the angels, Los Angeles, and that became my I guess my impetus for doing this series of 4 of them. And so my wife and I went around LA, took pictures of, in this case it's the Greystone Mansion in Beverly Hills, and took one of the Griffith Observatory, 4th Street Bridge, and I forget the other one. But anyway, every single piece in there is separately photographed and then composited in Photoshop. The angels were shot in my living room, in front of a bay window, so it's, got the certain light. And the tools in the foreground are all shot individually. The box and gardening tools are all shot separately and then composited in Photoshop. The same with the amount of dirt that wasn't really that as big as it looks there. It's probably only like that or so. And that's actually me as the gardener, so. But like I said, there was four of them, and I guess that's, I don't know what else, I mean, that's kind of the process of how I did it. Mainly, like I say, just a collage or photo collage.
Yeah. So my piece is way in the back. It's this family portrait of Lemmy, if you know Motorhead. The dude looks like Lemmy and his family. So it's Matt, Sheila, Queensryche, and Kix. And so for us, that's me and my family. And so for us, this project started over the lockdown where my wife's birthday, we couldn't go out and celebrate her, do anything. So it was like, how are we gonna have fun? And so we were stuck together. We had been for a while. And so my wife and I, we had these little nicknames for each other, these characters. So we like to observe people. We like characters. And so we had these nicknames of Bud Burma for me and Dusty Barrels for her. And so for that birthday at home, we're like, let's bring Bud and Dusty to life. And so so I had these old coveralls, and I didn't wash my hair, it was all greasy. And we had like Pabst Blue Ribbon as like vases or vase. And so we just had fun for the day. And so the kids, we forced the kids to dress up so their names were Jody and Courtney, I think. And so lots of pink and all this. And so, and then we documented with the camera. And so we did a bunch of photo shoots around the backyard with like fake pool, or not fake pools, but small pools and whatnot. And so that kind of sparked this interest of let's make more of these fake photos, these fake portraits. And so this was the second iteration of my wife's birthday. So this was, so we'd done a couple throughout the year. And so, but this one, and it starts with props. I mean, it starts with, like, I had this shirt and it kind of looks like Lemmy's shirt. And we like metal. And so it was like this idea of these aging metalheads and then their kids rebelling against them. And so they get the names Queensryche and Kix, but they're into hip hop and K-pop. And so this document of a fake family. And so that's kind of our process. It's very much the narrative base before. So while I like what I call the hunting and gathering photography, like you out on the street, you're hunting for the images, for me, it's the creating it, the idea first, and then executing it. So that's what I've been engaged in lately.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, really quickly, just so everybody knows, on the pamphlet that was on your seat, there's a front QR code that will link you to all of the artists' works. So if you want to see what they were showing and you couldn't see their picture, you can do that as well while they're talking. Sorry.
So the next question is, how do the materials and tools you use have an effect on your process? So for instance, do you prefer like a larger 4x5 camera? Do you prefer a point and shoot so you can be quick? Do you work with alternative processes or digital? How does what you use affect your?
Ray, do you want to start us off?
Sure.
I feel like kind of tools and processes
yeah, actually,
are a big part of your work.
Right. Actually, this particular photo, I did have an actual digital like SLR, but now I just shoot with my phone. I need an image, I just get it. But for this one, I use my like I said, digital SLR camera because I didn't have a phone then. But I think. For this one, I was just trying to, it was my take on the allegorical religious or angel paintings of the Renaissance. You see angels and so on. But I titled it in Spanish because of the angels and it just made more sense to me. So, but as far as the tools, it's really, most of it is really the collage in Photoshop. It's not so much the camera. That gives me my image, but then I really manipulate it in Photoshop. And it's kind of like painting or some kind of collage or painting, where it's not a straight photo or composed in the camera, or I don't know. See, I'm old school. I think of negatives and the old black and white and all that. But so for me, I don't know. And now I've done, and I also do a lot of animation, and I use photographs in my animation because they're, it looks like 3D, but because they're photographs, they look like three-dimensional, and I can animate them in After Effects. But I have a few. They're really short videos that I do, and so anyway, I don't know, the photographs I just seem to I mean, they imply kind of like three-dimensional forms, but they're really just flat photographs, you know. I don't know if that makes any sense, but.
Does anybody still shoot film?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was this film?
Yeah. Mine is film. I used an AE1 1982 Canon that my dad gifted me. It was mint condition, so I have been exploring working with it. It's kind of a love-hate relationship. I wouldn't say it's like I love it. I do have a DSLR as well, but I generally, it's my playtime, I feel like, when I'm out and shooting with it. I don't shoot a lot of people on it. I shoot mostly like, I'd say people, but it's like a mixture. It's kind of like more of the scenery. I'm more into like the scene of what's going on, and like if there's movement, if there's like interesting, anything like a little more obscure going on. I shot a lot in the, I just got back from Beirut. I'm from the Middle East, so I shoot a lot of like the places I'm at, and generally it's in the Middle East. And it's,
do you print your own?
I don't know. I go to Fromax.
Because you said you used some kind of some fabric or something on this one? Or?
So this one was an accidental like concoction of, wow. I thought it was really interesting how it came out. It developed because I placed accidentally like a napkin in front of the lens, and it just came out really obscure with this, but the red, it didn't even show this like napkin. I think it was so thin that it seemed like kind of like a filter.
Looks great, yeah.
Thank you, yeah. So this one was like such an experiment, working with like the material and imagery and the scene, and making something that was not as sharp. I felt like it was a little more diluted. But yeah, I generally work with film. That's more my medium within photography.
Right, that's all I grew up with.
Right. My dad, he's like the biggest inspiration with photography. He's like, and art, and both my parents, like you, were my art teachers. They went to art school in Beirut. So they met in art school and came here. And they were the ones who taught me, my mother abstract painting and my father perspective drawings. So I then learned photography over time.
Right, nice.
Yeah.
Great.
Film has this like wonderful component of magic that goes with it, and it also has this wonderful component of memory as well, because you take the photo once and you're going through the moment of remembering a photograph, and then it kind of disappears for a little bit, but then it reappears when you develop your film.
Right.
So it's a different sort of relationship with film photography than you have with digital photography. There's also a lot more bit of intention that's in it too. I feel like digital photography intention with your phone, or like, I don't know, a digital camera, you can take as many images as you want until your SD card is full. But when it comes to taking images on your film roll, you have like 12 images or 14 depending on the camera that you're using, and there's a lot more preciousness with it, I find, in my own practice. So I also prefer film. I use a twin lens so that I don't have to cover my face at all. I can like stand and it's at my hips, and I can look down, and I can also have conversations with people, and there's nothing sort of in between us, which is something that I prefer as well. Yeah. It's magic.
I think the concept of just gear, or like medium, in terms of you asked like 4x5, which is medium format, I think it plays an interesting role within just like the photo making process and world. I think for a long time, like sort of format or type of camera was used as a hierarchy, you know, or there's an assumption that if you see an image that's good, it's shot on film. And I think I have a kind of a more of a relationship in terms of my gear. Like, I guess, you know, I went to, as you mentioned in my bio, I went to grad school for photography and got my master's, and sort of within that that like interaction with being in a scholastic environment, I was shooting a lot of 4x5 and experimenting a lot with, you know, developing my film, and, you know, experimenting with medium format, and sort of felt like I sort of have the whole framework of different sort of the canon of how to make a photograph in different mediums. And I think over time, as I began to like conceptualize my projects and make work, I became more in tune with kind of just process, and how the camera became more of a tool for me to accomplish kind of this idea that I had in my head, and sort of now to this day, like I guess I negotiate, you know, I shoot a lot of medium format, I shoot a lot of digital, and I guess what it comes down to is kind of how can I accomplish what I feel like is my goal with a certain image or a certain body of work. So a lot of times when I'm out in the desert shooting and making work, what I would call my desert work, you know, it's much slower. I have there's sort of this freedom and time, space with my subject, so I feel like, you know, pulling out a tripod and, you know, working with my medium format lends itself a little bit more to the work and feels very poetic. And, you know, I make a lot of work in Long Beach, as I mentioned, and I feel like shooting digitally kind of gives me the result that I'm looking for. So I feel like film will always be something that I cherish, and kind of that physicality and process, especially in like, as you mentioned, you know, like the over flooding of images. And I feel like film is always something that's going to allow us to kind of enjoy like the tactile and the poetry of making an image. But me personally, I think I've become more in tune with just, you know, using the tool that works for me in a very specific way. So I very much shoot both digital and film.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think I've evolved in my understanding, or my aggression, I was very much a film guy, especially during the evolution of digital in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like I was in camp film, and I battled the digital people mindset in ways, like not physically. But then I was working for a commercial photographer that totally transitioned from all film to digital backs for 4x5 cameras, which eliminated me, the darkroom boy, the errand boy to the film labs and all of that. It's like they spent 20 grand on this digital back, but they saved so much money on processing, and it's like that also kind of rubbed me a little raw. So, but then it was like, I don't like this battle, and so I just retreated, and I went full Polaroid, and I was like kind of in between. It was film, but it was kind of instant, and so I liked that kind of. I'm neither, and then Polaroid discontinued their film, and I was like, I was so mad, and I knew this day would come where it's back. The kids, my kids, they want, and their cousins, they all want Polaroid cameras, and it's like Polaroid film. It's like I knew Polaroid. You could just like, I'm no business person though. That's the problem, and so it was not feasible, but the fact that they sold it, or they just completely, why not just scale back? So then I was lost. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I went back to film and digital, and so now I'm like, whatever, it's all good, and I'm not in any camp, and I use my phone a ton for images, and it's like, why not? It's great, and I use film. It's great, and so. But it's really interesting because I teach photography, and I teach a photo 1, which is all film and a 35 millimeter. And it's over like the early years for me. I started teaching in 2007. And so it was like they still wanted to do film. And then it was about 2013-ish. Well, I would say 2010 to 2016-ish. It was like this battle. They just wanted to do digital. It's like digital, I've got this beautiful DSLR, let me use it, teach me how to use it. I just want to do digital. And so it was always like going in that first day and letting them know this is film, and like convincing them, you will like it, just trust me, you will like it. But they battled me. Now they all want to do it. It's back. Like there's no battle whatsoever. They are excited to do film. And I think this is also this like generational thing of they want to rebel against what is the common, and the common is instant. They are so instant gratified. They want that like to slow it down and be patient. And so I think it's fascinating to watch the younger generation and what's in, I guess.
And like speaking of technological advancements in photography, I think it's only natural that you go into the influence of Instagram and social media within your work. Like, has that had an influence over your practice, or how do you guys, what's your outlook on the usage of it?
Yeah, your thinking on photography in itself. Anything?
Well, you guys as teachers, I feel like kind of have a very cerebral...
I'm not on any social media of any kind. So I'm old school, you know. Well, except maybe Facebook from a long time ago, but I never use it. But it's funny. I was just thinking this morning. I was watching a documentary called "Black Art: The Absence of Light," and there was a museum show where people were protesting, and then one of the quotes was, "It's not art, it's photography," you know, which is kind of weird because you know, the link between art, I mean, painting and photography has been around, well, since the camera was screwed up in the 16th century. So there's always been this connection. A lot of artists use photographs as a reference for the work they do. So, I mean, and there is that perception that the photography is not considered, you know, high art or as important as painting and so on. But it, you know, it's just a tool. It's all, you know, you can either paint something or you can photograph it, but it still comes from the mind or the idea or the creative thought that's behind it. So, so it's kind of a funny thing to hear.
I mean, the Instagram aesthetic is interesting because of like Stephen Shore doing the Instagram aesthetic 30 years ago of photographing his meals and his bed and road trip and all of that. And so that to me is fascinating, and see this circle of like, because he was lauded in the art world for having this aesthetic, this like anti-aesthetic aesthetic, and the demarcation of photography way back then, and now culture has finally caught up to what he was doing way back then. And it's, do you guys have thoughts on that, or do you think about, yeah?
Yeah, I feel like Andy Warhol said it best, that everyone is going to have their own 15 seconds of fame, or yeah, minutes. 15 minutes. 15 seconds, that's very short. Yeah, 15 minutes of fame. I think Instagram has provided like that sort of mechanism for them to publish, anyone to publish their daily life and photography or whatever, what have you they're doing. And it's given them a platform to kind of overshare. I feel like there's this sense of oversharing. I'm even of the schooling that photography in my mindset wasn't like the most art form. I come from like drawing and painting, very technical, but more like on the abstract drawing and painting schooling. So I feel as though now that I'm moving away from that mindset, I've become more attracted to photography. I feel like photography gives you could even Photoshop, you could even do a lot of different mechanisms with advanced technology, and with my design background, I'm a graphic designer by trade as well. It allows you to kind of open up that space, that artistic kind of liberation within that scope, that sort of reference point. So I feel like there's a lot to be said on the oversaturation through Instagram within the medium of photography, but at the same time, anything that is perceived as art from that person's perspective is generally going to be shared. And for me, I'm very vulnerable with my art, so I don't overshare. I feel like on Instagram, especially on my posts, I'm very, very strategic about what I place. It's really hard as an artist to put your heart and soul into something, and it's a beautiful thing once you allow yourself to put it out there.
I think Instagram and social media can be like a very troubling. I think it has a very troubling existence within the scope of photography for a lot of different reasons. I think just talking about process again in cameras, like, let's just say hypothetically you make this image, this 4x5 image, and there's a real physicality to it. Instagram, just in a very like literal sense, is a tiny grid on your phone that it's just not the platform. That's why I think stuff like this is really important. The physical, being able to interact with something in person. It's not, sure, you can showcase a beautiful image that's shot 4x5 on Instagram, but it's not the right platform for it, I would argue. And I feel like something that I've noticed with a lot of photographers and younger photographers, there's just this pressure of immediacy. Photography is already kind of, there's an immediacy to the medium. Anyone can pick up a camera or a phone and make an image, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about photography, the ability to fall in love with it that way. But I also think that Instagram and social media has contributed to this kind of mood or pressure that, if you make something, there's kind of a little bit less focus on the process of making something and reflecting on it over time, and Instagram has just become this flood to kind of just outlet these photos, right? So it's, I think it can be very troubling. as an artist to kind of navigate that. But you know, on the flip side, it can also open up a world of opportunity for tons of photographers from all around the world that might not have, you know, the accessibility to be recognized or meet with an editor from the New York Times who live, you know, in a very small village or any circumstance, you know. So it does provide this amazing platform for very talented artists and individuals to get seen and get their work out there. And I've gotten jobs via Instagram, so you know, it can definitely be a positive thing in that way. But I think it's very important to like understand the scope that social media or Instagram can play, and kind of not let it get the best of you. I think you know, I constantly try and remind myself like why I make images, what drives me to keep going, and I think a lot of it is just that really personal interaction that I have with it, and try to use Instagram as a way to, like, of course, promote my work and let people know what I'm doing, and share things that I'm proud of, and kind of on my time, like you mentioned, sort of on a time that feels that's right for you. But not let it, I think it can be easy to sort of let the promotion sort of triumph the process of making the work. And I you know, whenever friends or people would reach out to me, I try and tell them, like, you know, the work is the most important thing, not that like the promotion of it. So, you know, first you have to make the work and you know, interact with it, and then when you feel the time is ready, you can sort of let because once you let it out to other people, it's kind of no longer yours anymore. It's sort of everyone's to do whatever they want with it, and it's sort of, you lose a little bit of that intimacy with it. So I think it's both can be great and also very, very troubling. So
it's also really hard for artists to put up with all that labor and like compete with the capacity that is Instagram and like these bombardment with images and stuff on the daily. I think that artists, because of how, I don't know about everyone here, but I'm precious with the work that I make, and you hold them closely. And when you feel this pressure and this competition between like the pace in which like images are made and like images are like produced and shared, it's so hard to keep up with it, and it becomes so much more labor as an artist, and you just, it's overwhelming, it really is. But I also have gotten jobs through Instagram as well, so it's just sort of like a shift. Maybe it's not so much a competition as it is like a definite shift in photography.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I had a difficult relationship with Instagram. Like, I had friends that embraced it, and our careers took off. So it's like, oh, I should do that too. And basically, the one advice that I got was like, post every day. So for like 3 years, I did that, but he was doing it full time, and I was doing it part time, and that's the difference. And so once I realized that, it's like kind of the same thing with film. I just retreated, but then I'm still on it. I'm looking at everybody else's work and what it does to culture, and want this immediate gratification, and like the likes, the hearts, and all of this, and it's just like, oh man, there's so much. And so a year ago, I got invited to participate in this show, but it was like months out. And so I thought about this idea that I had about using Instagram to post daily. So I made a new account, and it was called Sit in Silence with Steve. And so every day I posted, I made an image, or made a 1 minute video and posted that. And then for 100 days, I gave myself 100 days. So this discipline of like being silent, like of stepping back and being quiet, but then still using this platform that is so loud, and attention, and selfies, and look how beautiful I am. And I did not beautify myself in any way for all of these. And so then the piece for the show was like 100 minutes long of one minute videos of me silent. Although there was noise around, and that was part of the interest in me, is like for me to be quiet, but then to pay attention and to listen and to look. Well, I was looking at the screen, but to pay attention. And so yeah, that was my kind of wrestling with it. And I'm still interested in that idea of using these platforms, but trying to point out the flaws in them, or the downsides in them.
So kind of going off of this, with the immediacy and the accessibility oversaturation, however you want to call it, of photography now, especially on social media, do you still believe the medium should be regarded as fine art, and why?
It depends. I feel like it depends on the intention behind the image. I don't think that all images are intentionally fine art, especially photographs. It depends on how you position yourself. It depends now wholeheartely how well you came up with or randomly, intuitively you perform this, the labor behind it. I don't believe that everything is under the scope of fine art within the medium of photography, but it's all intentional. And within Instagram, it's instant gratification constantly, so it's just there's this sense, it's a paradox, I think, for artists to place their imagery on there with intent, but there's other people not placing the fine art intention within their photography, if that makes any sense. So it's all about that.
Yeah, and to me, it's like, well, there's good painting and bad painting, right? So just like there's good photography and bad photography. Right. So, I guess, like you say, the intent makes a difference, and the image you use, how it's used, etc. So it's, I realize it's all subjective, but still, I think you can tell maybe a bad painting from a good painting, or maybe you can't. I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I can't.
You have an eye for it.
Yeah, exactly. There it is.
Yeah, the idea of intent, though, is really interesting. Like, well, first of all, my answer would be yes. Meaning answer would be yes. But like, some of the work that I look at the most, or some of the work that I'm most drawn to, is like older photographs that were made with absolutely no intent of being art. But for me, I look at them today, like it's the most artistic thing, the most beautiful thing. And I think a lot of that, I think there's like a romanticism associated with time, right? So someone who was taking a picture of their car in the 60s in their front porch because they needed to report a smog check or something. I don't know, I'm just making this up. But like, if someone were to, take me to their house and show me these 100 photographs of their vintage Cadillac that were made in the most non-artistic way, I would probably be inspired to go out and make work because I feel it's so artistic, So I think, I can go on and on about that. There's this photographer named Norm Clausen who, I'm sure many of you have heard of Richard Prince, who's like a very profound contemporary artist, but he actually, a lot of the Marlborough imagery that he uses for his, collages are taken from photographs that were made by this commercial photographer called Norm Clausen, who photographed a lot for Marlborough in Utah, and they were totally commercial photographs, of these cowboys on horses for cigarette ads. He had no intention of being an artist. He was working as a commercial photographer because that's all he knew. And, I look at his images and they're like some of my, if I had to like give you a list of some of my favorite photographers, he would be on there. And I really find that relationship interesting between, with like how intention can be, perceived over the passage of time. But I think that's one of the most beautiful things about photography, and that's why I think in and of itself, like it should be viewed as an art. Obviously, every photographer has the right to kind of claim their own in terms of I'm an artist, I'm a photojournalist, that's, they have the power to do that, but
Yeah, maybe in that grain also just value that we give images. There's the first person to ever be in an image was an accident. It was like this really long exposure time, but he sat to get his shoe shined long enough that he ended up in the exposure. So like there wasn't intention there, but we give that image this large amount of value because it's a piece of something and it holds the first person to ever be photographed, and it's like it's a piece of history. So in that grain, you would hold value to something because it can teach us something. But maybe for you hold value in it because it can give you inspiration. And like it's just, we don't just hold things close to us because of intention. We also hold them because of what sort of pieces of ourselves do we see in that.
Yeah, totally. I feel like like what you guys are saying, it does make sense. Like going back in historical imagery, there's a sense of value that we give looking back. It's it's a lot more artistic in our scope, like when we look at it, as opposed to, I guess when I'm thinking intentional, like now it's so saturated, like currently we see so much imagery that it's like overload, like it's sensory overload for me. I'm very particular in that scope, and that's why within the framework of photography, within art, I think it can somehow also dive into like abstraction, and like when you're painting, you are intending to make fine art. So coming from that background, I felt like intentional artwork when it comes to photography is why I said a little bit of the no, but I do see what you guys are saying about the history of art and how it sometimes didn't have the intention behind it.
Yeah, I'm just kind of skirting the fine art question a little bit, but I think I'm roundabout going to talk about it. But also bring it back to the demarcation, just this overwhelming of imagery. And a friend of mine who's a photographer has this thought, and I'm curious what you guys think. And I kind of like it. It's this idea of all these images on your phones and on Instagram and I mean, I have 47,000, I should delete some, but and store them, back them up. But like, I have 47,000 images. So his mindset is that these are not photographs until they're printed. Once they're printed, it becomes a photograph. And so there's something magical that happens. But he regards these as photographs and what we have on our phones as images. And I kind of like that. I like that we're not inundated with photographs, we're inundated with images. And so that does help a little bit, this idea of the fine art idea, where we're not inundated with fine art or images trying to be fine art. We're inundated with images, and there's still the fine art, the printed photograph is a rarity. Because I don't print hardly any of these 47,000. And so those that do get printed, they're special. And so it's, again,
you're being selective, so that's what defines it for you, maybe.
Right. But I do think that some of my favorite photographers that are fine art photographers, they are questioning photography. They are engaging in the idea of photography. And I think that goes to intention, but it's like, that's to me what's really interesting in fine art photography today, is those that are questioning and challenging photographic traditions and the process in general.
And like speaking to the, each brought up interesting aspects of art history and even contemporary photography, but are there photographers that have influenced or inspired you? Could you speak to those?
Yeah, for me it's wide range, but for this series, it was definitely like Cindy Sherman. I can't deny that in any way. But there's others that, for me, the Bill Owens, his Suburbia series, he's definitely documenting. If you're familiar with the Suburbia series, it's like he documents families in the 60s, 70s, suburban families. And so they're weird. Some of them are super weird. He's looking for the oddities. And so that's what I want to create. I want to create some of the odd families that he found. And so, I love Uta Bart, who we were talking about. She's probably my favorite photographer and her approach to photography. But another that I'll just throw out is another contemporary, Jessica Eaton, is one of my current really faves.
Yeah, I think for my work personally, there's definitely a canon of, photography canon of, influences for sure. Not to just start mentioning a bunch of people, but sure. Walker Evans and Dorothy Lang and Robert Frank and someone like Larry Sultan, who I think was one of the first people. His body of work, Pictures from Home. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but I think kind of brought forth the idea for me of how something so mundane and intimate as photographing your parents at their home over the course of X amount of years, 20 years, and sort of cataloging just these everyday experiences in such a nuanced and like intimate way could be so powerful. And I remember the first time looking at that book, just made me feel so emotional and kind of really opened up this whole door of opportunity in my head of, okay, I don't need to travel to, you know, the other side of the world to make a really special picture. I can literally make it in the most intimate, close way with my family. So I think that was like sort of when a switch went off for me. Also, like a lot of literature, you know, a lot of poetry. I think with some of my work, I like to write a little bit as well to kind of accompany the work, and I think the two can inform each other in a really nice way. I actually find myself looking, you know, with the overflooding of images and Instagram and stuff, I try and stay away from images as much as I can. I think it's inevitable that's obviously there's gonna be a lot of images that I see on a day-to-day basis, but looking a lot at just like design and architecture and how looking at the way light can hit a surface and just the way light can hit a face can sometimes be very informative in terms of how I want to construct my images and little tools I can pick up. Again, when I find someone on the street and I have a minute or 30 seconds to try and make this, you know, create this interaction and take a formal picture of them, how I can sort of apply some of these other inspirations into making an image, aside from just photographers. So, yeah.
I think a big inspiration for me to throw a wrench in this whole fine art conversation are just like mothers throughout our history, or just like throughout our own histories, who create these images of their families. I think that motherhood, historically, they have like this challenge to document and to remember their families, and I think that is such a huge inspiration of mine. And I know that maybe they're not technically fine art makers, but they are image makers, and those images have a huge impact on all of our histories. And so I'm very grateful for that. But in the same grain, there are artists who are mothers who photograph, like Sally Mann. Sally Mann is probably one of my biggest inspirations. She wrote this book called Hold Still, which is a memoir, and within it, she writes this really wonderful quote that I will always hold close to me, which is, I don't revisit images very often, because every single time you revisit these images, you alter your memory of that moment in time. So you're irrevocably altering an image or a memory every single time you look at these images. And I think so much about the memories that I have and how important photography is to remember those things, but how they can also alter the actual reality of those moments. And that's why Sally Mann's amazing. Read her book, but also say thanks to your moms for having images of you as babies, because that's something that you never would have had if not for them.
100%. For me, I actually am really inspired by my peers, especially Middle Eastern, Lebanese, specifically photographers. There's two that I can name. Mariam Bolis, I'm totally butchering the last name, and Yasmin Halil. They're both from Beirut. And Mariam became more so known because she did a lot of photography during the revolution, or we call it Thawra, in Lebanon, and she was going around taking photos, really overly exposed photos with really intense like flashes of light of these different types of people like protesting during the Thawra. And it became really, globally, she became famous, and New York Times published her, her work. I believe it was New York Times or New York Magazine. And I was really inspired by her photography, and I think this is like where I really started to become more intentional with my photography, my work. And then Yasmin Halil, I did meet her, and she's in the art scene in Beirut, and she's an incredible photographer, and she takes the medium to like the next level by kind of manipulating a lot of her imagery. And she's currently displaying in, I believe, Belgium, her work. So yeah, it's very intentional, a lot of like personal imagery, and there's like this sort of scope of seeing people like Middle Eastern artists, because you don't see that here, really. You don't see a lot of like my own kind of, I feel like I don't see a lot of my own kind of people in the art world here in LA. So seeing them like really putting themselves out there, especially with our culture, it's not really, it's kind of frowned upon growing up, being an artist, and having their expression like opening up themselves to the art world. And I feel a lot more safe in that mechanism, like how they portrayed themselves is how I feel better about my own work and being more explicit with my own art. So they've helped me be a better artist in a way, watching them grow.
Yeah, well, for me, I guess some of my early exposure to photography, I like photography, was just straight photography, like Manuel Alvarez Bravo, not because his last name is the same as mine, but I like this work of people, and also similar artists as Graciela Iturbide, that I just like their photos. But then I think also the process, I think the Starn twins, I think they're photographers that kind of distress the photo and use tape and all that. That's kind of a process that I kind of like. To me, it's kind of what I do, only, I do it in Photoshop, so.
Yeah, Graciela had I've lived in Mexico, and when we were catching up earlier, for a large portion of the past 8 years or so, and she had a major retrospective. Yeah. It was one of the most inspiring.
Yeah, there's a photo of her. It looks like a woman in a full dress carrying like a boombox or going over this mountain. It's a great photo.
Yeah.
Okay, so final question. Where and how do you see photography evolving from this point?
I wanted to talk about books because I'm a big book guy, so I'll use that as a way.
It's a hard question.
I mean, I hope that, I know we've touched about it through some of the different questions and topics, but hopefully, taking a step back, I would like to think, whether it's the embracing of going back to film or just embracing the physical, and I think books is kind of the ultimate way, books were kind of my way into photography when I was in school. Just going into the library, opening photography books was the way I fell in love, I think, in a big way with the medium, and how I sort of started what I would, to kind of become the artist or photographer that I would consider myself. I attribute a lot to just looking at books. And as I think the first question I stated, when I'm making my work, it's all within the scope of how can this one day become a book. Whether or not that actually happens, I'm thinking about it in a project and ultimately in book form. So I think hopefully the future, where are we going? I would like to think, we start embracing more of the physical books. There's obviously a lot of fairs, LA Art Book Fair, places where you can interact with books, and the book world is starting to grow, and sort of there's a very traditional way of how books were made, and you see photo books of all different kinds now that are puzzles, and you open them up and there's accordions, and I personally align more with the traditional way of making a book, but I think there's a beauty in kind of the art of bookmaking itself. So I don't know if any of you guys have any comments on the role that book plays or might in the future of photography, or if you've published any books, or if there's any books that kind of change the way you think.
I don't. Steve.
I mean, I love them.
Yeah.
And then I'm grateful in the same way of film. Bookstores went down 10 years ago, and yet the last bookstore, right? It's still around, and I think there's a rejuvenation of things that have been swept under. But yeah, I hope. I mean, I got really scared with the NFT thing.
Yeah, I was about to say NFTs.
Yeah,
you were saying how you don't own your image once it's out, but with NFTs, I think that's the future of photography, is the copywriting of your photography, and seeing it become basically immortalized in a way. My full time is working with NFTs, technically writing about NFTs and how they basically are kind of helping authenticate imagery and physical products. So just taking that into consideration and making this sort of all your images, actually you're owning them, taking ownership of them is a really that's where I see the future of photography going.
But if can you sell the NFT and
you could sell
you still own it?
Right. You still own it digitally, and I feel like it's stays on the blockchain, and that's like the best way that you can keep your imagery like on the blockchain and have it for your own self instead of throwing the images out and then placing like your name on it. I feel like it's kind of there's
Well, let's say if somebody buys your NFT, can they sell it?
yeah. So there's like a whole thing with the resale market. There's like a big. I think there's a lot of money to be made on these new resale marketplaces for NFTs. So there's like a whole segment where images and physical products with digital twins are being resold in these marketplaces that are they're building these marketplaces. Facebook has one or Meta has a marketplace that just launched last year, I believe. So right now I think it's slowly, there's a slow progression, but it's happening.
It's exciting because it's like, well, there's just a lot of opportunity now. It's like NFTs, you can make photography books. Like it's exciting that photography now we have so many different options and modes to use it. And I think that's currently the coolest thing about photo is that anyone can use it. And so what if you're not trying to make art, you're trying to make a memory or you're trying to do anything with it. It's just cool that there are a lot of options. In the future, maybe there will be more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blown away that we all have a camera on our person because we have a camera or a phone. Like that, 20 years ago, it was like we were told by AAA to have a point and shoot in your glove box in case you get in an accident. It's like we all can document anything at any time, and that's photography. And that blows my mind there's a great book. Well, I don't think it's great. It's an interesting book. It's called Photography Changes Everything. And every chapter, they're really short chapters, but it's like photography changes Middle East economics. I mean, it's like, and then photography changes weddings. But like the wedding one is fascinating. I mean, it's like a wedding now, everybody's doing this. And like there's like all the rules, don't bring out your phone. But that's photography that changed that experience. And so, I mean, grocery shopping, I'm taking photos of the list and looking at a photograph or an image, and I'm documenting. I think photography has changed everything. And so that is really interesting to me, just in the last 20 years. But also this idea of cameras in glasses. Have you guys seen these? Like Ray-Ban has it. So whatever you're looking at, and it's connected to your phone. So that's how you take the shot. And like that's scary, I think.
That's controversial, and as far as privacy and all that. Yeah.
Yes. So that's like, I mean, AI and all this new technology. I mean, is there going to be like a contact lens that is a camera? And so like it just, I mean, because the camera in the glasses was pretty obvious, but I mean, I could see weird technology coming in the future.
You should do 100-day camera and lenses with Steve.
Yes, that's right. It's back and forth, right. Can I steal that?
Yeah, do it.
Do you guys have any questions out there? Thank you so much, everybody, for coming today. And thank you so much for our panelists.